Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Chris.
Hello.
And we are getting together to talk about Brandon Sanderson's novel, The Rhythm of War, which is the fourth book in the Stormlight Archive. Um, and Just before we get into it much at all, I did want to mention this is not a review in the sense of like, do you want to read this? That's a bad one for this. This is like just talking through the elements of the story. So there are going to be spoilers all over. If you have not read the book, you know, please come back later, but first read the book. There's going to be spoilers all through this discussion, and I don't want to ruin too much for you. Um, so, Also, as usual, if you like my work, if you like what I do, please consider supporting me via subscribestar.com/Zachlog hyphen the hyphen great. The link is in the description. And having said that, Chris has kindly volunteered to read the book for us before the discussion. Go ahead, Chris. Just get going.
For Isaac Stewart, who paints my imagination. Preface and acknowledgments. I am proud to present to you Rhythm of War.
I have to admit you rolled with that better than I expected. No, the I listened to the audiobook, which is 50 hours, so we're not reading this one, unlike the poems. um, but Let's see. So um, I don't know. I guess just first hmm, overall impressions, what you think of the where the story is going, or where it's how you think this one added to the story as a whole so far.
Overall, I thought it was fantastic. I was already going into it expecting to enjoy it because it's Brandon Sanderson. Uh, but like even then, I was just impressed. Just the sheer scale of how he keeps expanding things while keeping it like very personal stories. Uh, for how big it is, it has a remarkable focus on the main characters and their internal struggles, and just the way he humanizes people within all these like fantastic magic systems. It's really kind of amazing. And then now branching it from this one world to the Cosmere as a whole, but doing it in a way where, like, whenever elements from other stories that I haven't read yet came up, I wasn't confused about it. It was like, man, that really makes me want to read those stories and find out more about this. So, for
Yes.
instance,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
like I hadn't read Elantris before this one, but there were a few little things here and there, especially like the seance uh, that get discussed, where I'm like, that sounds kind of interesting. So I went and read Elantris afterwards, and I like the way he used those other sort of Cosmere stories in it, where it's like you don't necessarily have to be familiar with those stories. Like it works just the way he brought them in as just sort of a new little texture. Like I don't understand this, but that's okay, and I just want to learn more on top of that.
Yeah, and so this is kind of supposed to be like Brandon Sanderson's version of like the Dark Tower series, or what's another what's another one where another author did that? I know there's at least one more. Um, but where an author has a book or set of books that kind of ties all the other works together. Which it's, for instance, Stephen King's version with the Dark Tower series, more successful at sometimes than others. Like sometimes you're like, I don't know if you're pulling this off very well. But yeah, so far, and Sanderson's is doing very well in that. Let's see. So there's the sword Nightblood, which is from Warbreaker.
As well as Vasher.
Yeah. Well, does he show up or is he just talked about?
Kaladin goes talk to him whenever he's thinking about giving up and becoming an Ardent. And they have the fight in the laundry.
Zyle is Asher?
Vasher? Yeah.
I did not realize that was the same character. It's been a while since I've read Warbreaker, so kind of odd that he hasn't said anything about Nightblood being thrown around. That seems like something he would have mentioned if that was the... okay. So yeah, there's Nightblood and Vasher, apparently, from Warbreaker. I hadn't caught that. There's the Seon from Elantris. Some of the little quotes at the beginning of the chapter introductions are by Sazed, now known as Balance.
Harmony.
What's that? Harmony. Okay, Harmony. I thought, yeah, you're right. It is Harmony.
And he also talks, kind of hints at like needing to find somebody to work on his behalf since his powers cancel each other out. And hey, there's a series going on about him trying to recruit somebody.
Right. There was a quote about him finding someone who can be both sword and shield. Who can protect and attack, which is I think Waxilium, is that his? It's
right.
been a while since but I think that's how he describes himself as well at one point. Well, no, he says in Bands of Mourning, I think it is. He says he's Harmony's sword, I believe. Again, it's been a while. I have a good memory for these things, but not perfect. Not photographic memory.
And also, even though like we were aware that the Cosmere was all building to one thing, whenever we're reading those other stories like years ago, we weren't necessarily thinking, hey, we're going to need to remember this for a completely different series.
That too. And there's go ahead.
So there's also the mention of was it Thydakar, the Lord of Scars, which is implied to be Kelsier, because Wit, who is Hoyd, mentions having to having beat him up before, which happened in Mistborn Secret Histories. So that seems to be pretty strongly implied.
It's really kind of weird to me that Kelsier is leading such a ruthless, well, not even ruthless, because I mean he could totally be ruthless, but kind of amoral group. Like that doesn't that because like Murray's because Kelsier's or Thydokar, is that the name? Yeah, so he's supposed to be leading the Ghost Bloods, right? And like, who Murray's is pretty high up in that, and Murray's is nasty. Like, capturing a teenage girl and handing her over to the Fused. Well, what's going to happen to her? Probably tortured and killed. Not my problem.
There is the question of exactly like how much oversight Kelsier would have over his individual agents. And I mean, we do know from his series, like Mistborn, like he's kind of all about, you know, taking down any sort of like authority figure, and he doesn't like anybody have like a monopoly on power. So I could see his motivations like making sense, and then other people joining in, like literally worlds away from his direct influence, and just sort of doing their own thing with just a similar goal.
Yeah, and then there's there's also the White Sand from I can't I read a short story involving that world, but I can't remember the name of it. That was in Arcanum Unbound. And I think in one of those little chapter headers, they mention the world with the haunted forest.
Yeah.
And it's like something, and part of what happened there was because of the shattering or death of one of the shards.
Yes, and apparently even the strange chickens, which are described almost more like parrots, apparently those are from another story that I didn't realize.
Well,
there's a reference to them in Coppermind.
Yeah, well, okay. Because Roshar doesn't have Earth-like creatures, basically the humans on Roshar refer to all birds as chickens. Is what that is.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if you would, because the way you'd phrased that, you said it's like a parrot. Well, no, it's a parrot.
Well, apparently it's actually something else.
Yes, I
hadn't read the story, so I was like, oh wait, there's whole more things about this.
Yes, there's another story about their magical, this one island on this one world has these magical birds, and I forget what their capabilities are. But yeah, okay, I didn't know that was them. But
yeah. So to sum it all up, this series is now incorporating bits of everything. But even when you don't realize it's from another story, it's still like, huh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he's tying all of these things together in this one series. I hope he makes it. He completes this and manages to tie it all together well. The good news, in that regard, is that he said he's planning this as 2 sets of 5. So he has just one more book to get to the end of this set and have some kind of conclusion. So even if, God forbid, he doesn't make it the whole way through all 10, we will have some conclusion for what we have so far.
Well, and in universe, they have 10 days to find out what the resolution of this first part is.
Okay, okay. That is one kind of interesting thing, because, okay. Oh boy, we're all okay. So part of the conclusion of this book, Dalinar had challenged Odium to a contest of champions, and Odium said, "Sure, we'll do that." And he thought he was going to flip Dalinar to his side, and Dalinar was going to be his champion. Dalinar said, "No, you cannot have my pain. Those were my mistakes. That was, my wrongs. I am going to bear that and find a way to live with that." And so, for a while, I thought Moash might be it. Might be who he went with instead, but doesn't look like that. Especially not now.
You see, I didn't get that feeling. Like, I felt like Moash was just sort of like a simple tool I never got the feeling that Odium like had any like great designs for him. Just this is a human who is receptive to him, because there's not going to be a lot of humans that are willing to work with the Voidbringers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in this case it was just the narrative time that the book was spending on him. Like you were inside Moash's head for several sections of this book, and it's like, are they building something from this? I guess was where I was thinking.
So the way I saw from this, and this will kind of work if you want to just jump onto the Kaladin storyline. But so I got the sense that the pursuer was Kaladin's sort of physical foil. So this is the physical struggle that Kaladin has to constantly go after. But then Moash was sort of his like mental or spiritual foil, where like he represented the things that were assaulting Kelsier like on a daily basis.
Kaladin,
sorry.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay, I want to say one more thing, and then we'll start going into the different storylines. And so at the end of this book, Dalinar gets Odium to agree to the Contest of Champions, and they set a time, which is 10 days away from the conclusion of this book. One really interesting thing about that to me is, between book one and the end of book one and the beginning of book two, at least a few months have passed. I don't remember, but like it's been a few months. Things have been developing for a little while. Between the end of book two and book three, again, there's significant time is passing. Things are changing quite a bit. Between 3 and 4, it seems like it's almost a year. Book 5 has to pick up like immediately, because you can't, like, if logically this Contest of Champions is gonna be near the climax of book 5, and if it's only 10 days away, well, you're not gonna go straight to that in a 1,000-page book, so it's gonna pretty much pick up the next day. It kind of has to, which is kind of an interesting development on this one. But okay. So Chris and I had previously recorded a conversation about Oathbringer, and not long ago I went back and re-listened to that, and it's kind of scattered and all over the place and a mess. I apologize. So when I was thinking about that, I decided to try and organize this conversation a little bit more, and I sat down and tried to outline different parts of the book. And so I came up with basically there's 3 main storylines. Just before we started this, Chris kindly pointed out a 4th, which I neglected. And so the 3 I came up with, there's the military campaign in Emuli. There's the diplomatic mission to Lasting Integrity, the City of the Honor Spren, and there is the invasion of the Tower, which I consider that one kind of the main story of this book. The others are kind of there along with it. That's just me, maybe. And then Chris pointed out there's also the flashbacks following Venli, which I should have put that down as a 4th one. But so in the Tower storyline, we're following Venli, Kaladin, and Navani. And you were talking about Kaladin there.
Yeah. So to begin with, I just love the setup for all of this. Whenever whenever Kaladin is relieved of duty, and he just like he's just so angry at Dalinar, and you're supposed to be different. And then Dalinar just asks, "Why am I different?" And Kaladin realizes, well, it's because he cares about his men. And I love that moment because it's such a great moment, like in the story, where it's very realistic to their respective characters, but also we've had 3 books to see this relationship develop. So there's a lot of weight behind it because Dalinar has treated Kaladin basically like his own son. And in this moment, Kaladin is acting, like a child. And Dalinar is just very calm. And again, does the fatherly thing of sort of just guiding him in the right direction. And argue that. And that's finally what gets it through to Kaladin that, something needs to change. So Kaladin's sort of realization there that there is something seriously wrong and that he needs to take the break, I think that sets everything up because he already is having the mental struggles. And that's something that he's prepared to work on. And he sees this sort of like period of peace as being a time to work on that. And then the tower is invaded. And as TV Tropes puts it, it's Die Hard Urithiru. It's like, okay, you've accepted that you're broken and you can't really take anymore. So now let's make everything so much worse than you've ever had to deal with before. And that's saying a lot.
What was so yeah, it's also kind of interesting irony of Kaladin's character because I mean he was like okay, Kaladin is kind of a symbol of hope, don't give up, keep going. And he was that somewhat in earlier books, but it's definitely more pronounced here. Kaladin for the people, for the humans in the tower. And it is an interesting irony that Kaladin's this symbol of hope to these people. Don't give up, fight on. While the whole time, internally he's battling despair. Giving into the blackness. And then there's I guess there's kind of 3 main external enemies for him in each in a very different kind of way in this book. There's Leshwi, who is she the leader of the Heavenly Ones or a leader? I think she's the leader of the Heavenly Ones. But there's Leshwi, who is the leader of the fused, who have similar powers to Kaladin's, to the Windrunners, and they have not just him and Leshwi, but the Windrunners and the Heavenly Ones as a whole have a very honorable enemy kind of relationship. There's a there's a dynamic between them that is entirely different from anyone else in this struggle.
Now, I do have to say there are hints of this going back to the first book when Dalinar fights the Parshmen in the Shard Plate. So the fused haven't been introduced yet, but it is one of the Parshendi who does they do the salute to everything because they were fighting, but then Kaladin's band comes in and separates them, and as they're being separated, the Parshendi gives them a salute. There were hints of this, but yes, the once Odium's forces get involved in a big way, you don't really see much of this.
And so, yeah, okay, so there's Leshwi, and they respect each other, and they are very much a mirror of one another. There's the pursuer, Lesion. Do I have that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. There's Lesion the pursuer, who has this tradition that's my tradition, and that anyone who kills one of his bodies, he's going to come back, hunt them, and kill them. And Kaladin manages to kill him. Not only manages to kill him, but manages to kill him while he's essentially just a regular human.
But no. The fabrial was broken, right? That's what he tells them.
And so Kaladin manages to kill him, and so he's set his sights on, I am going to pursue Kaladin, to the ends of the earth. I will kill him, which is also, and not going to let up, which is also, if Sanderson had kind of tapped at this himself, I think I would have called it heavy-handed. But there's just these two things that match up. Like he wasn't like Sanderson wasn't wasn't like waving a big flag over it. But Lesion is kind of, in some ways, I think, a physical manifestation of the kind of despair that Kaladin is dealing with, because it's going to, you can't just walk away. It's going to find you. It's always out there. It's always there, and it's going to come get you. And I think the pursuer is kind of like that, potential emotional destruction always at Kaladin's back. And then the third opponent for Kaladin in this one, who is mostly off stage, it would be Moash, who is kind of a kind of like would be Kaladin gone bad. Like he has so much similar in where he came from, but he came to a different conclusion, and went down the entirely opposite path. And so it's kind of interesting seeing the three opponents to Kaladin in that.
Yeah, I feel like the big difference between Kaladin and Moash does come from Kaladin's father, because from a young age, Kaladin was brought up to be a healer. So even whenever he's, a soldier and believes he should be a soldier, there is that part of him that feels like he should be doing some good in the world. Whereas Moash just has none of that.
Well, the other thing, and I hadn't thought about this until just now, Kaladin's problem that he's that is kind of dogging him through so much of this book, or the emotional problem, is he has this load of guilt that he can't let go of, he can't deal with, and that actually threatens to destroy him. Whereas Moash came to the decision to just let go of, to just hand over all of the guilt, the anger, the pain, and cease being entirely human by doing so. And so that's another interesting parallel / contrast between them, the two.
Yeah. Although Moash does consider that in some of the interludes when we see things from his perspective, but he's convinced that Kaladin just would never accept that and would just choose death before, because Kaladin's just too attached to his emotional pain.
It's I was actually kind of thinking, especially since we've discussed we've covered it, we've talked about a couple of Harry Dresden books as well. Kaladin kind of has some of the same problem that Harry Dresden does, because like there's Harry Dresden has this kind of guilt. I should have done better in this. I should have saved so and so, and like a lot of that. No, that's really not your fault. No, Susan did something really stupid. That was her fault. And so they both have that they both have that a similar problem in that regard.
This idea that they should be able to save everyone, and that if somebody dies on their watch, it is directly their fault and some moral failing of their own.
Right. Yes.
Which fortunately leads to Kaladin's next stage of development, his next Radiant Oath.
Yes. So that's the it's kind of interesting because there's from what we've seen of them so far, okay, all of the Radiants share the first one. And then the different orders of Radiants go different ways from there. And it kind of for Windrunners, I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Is the second one. It kind of seems like the third one for them is more personalized, more individual, right, for each of them. And I guess it actually kind of continues along that, where each one needs to change. Although, what is the Skybreakers? Theirs, from what we've seen, theirs seems to be a little more. They have some element of choice. They get to choose. They get to decide what their standard of law is. But then they have to kind of become a law unto themselves. Is their last stage of development, which is kind of creepy.
Well, that you sort of get back to like Plato and Aristotle, where like part of becoming a virtuous person, like learning to live in virtue, is that at a certain point, if you become a virtuous person, then by definition, whatever you do is virtuous, because you've made yourself a virtuous person. So that was the sort of sense that I got from it. Not you can do whatever you want, but by that point, as you work your way through the ideals, you get to the point where you have this sense of justice. You've internalized these different qualities, where by that point you learn how to trust your instincts whenever it comes to these things.
Although, considering how Nail, the leader of their order, is doing, that doesn't always seem to be the best plan. Still, if I had like a soundboard, if I had a way to edit this in easily, I would totally drop in what is it? The clip from Sylvester Stallone, Judge Dredd. I am the law.
Yeah. Now, one thing I don't know if this is addressed or if it will be, but it is sort of established that in order to bond with a Spren, you have to be like broken in some way. You have to have undergone some traumatic thing in your past that sort of like cracks open your soul enough to make the bond. The thing I'm wondering is, once you have that crack, like once you have that damage done, can you bond with any spren, or does the spren available to you depend on the specific sort of trauma you've undergone? Because it's possible that in order to be a windrunner, bond with an honor spren, you have to have gone through the sort of like depression sort of thing to be open to that particular thing, which would explain why a lot of the different orders tend to have qualities in common with one another, and why for the windrunners the ideals might tend towards like forgiving yourself and understanding some things are out of your control, whereas other orders don't worry about that.
Okay, so let's see. We have trying to, like I said, kind of keep this moving. The other people in the tower. There's Kaladin. There's Venli. Kind of weird because in terms of each of these books so far has had the backstory of one of the characters, and that character has kind of been the focal point in some ways for the book. Venli's story in the present, I didn't really find that interesting. I mean, it's not bad, but it's just like that's not like if you didn't have her flashbacks, if those weren't part of this book, like I wouldn't see her as the primary character of this book.
So I read a little bit of the commentary that Brandon Sanderson wrote for the preview chapters, and apparently for Venli's point of view, it was kind of hard for him to write because she is not on board for being a hero. She just doesn't want anything to do with all this craziness going on. She just wants to forget it. She just wants to get out of there. So having a main character that does not want to engage with the plot can be a bit of a problem. I think he pulls it off well, where I wasn't annoyed with her with her sections. I did find them interesting. Like you say, they're not really what's driving the plot. It's not really like, oh, I can't wait till I get to the next Venli section. But at the same time, seeing things from her perspective, it does contrast really well with the earlier books, where you just sort of know the Parshendi as these inhuman monsters. And there's hints that it's more complicated, but they're inhuman. And every time you see them, they're trying to kill all the people you care about. So I think that brings a lot of interesting contrast for the series as a whole. And now it's set up where going forward, things with her should be a lot more interesting.
So let's see. Now with the flashbacks with Venli, it is interesting seeing more about where how the Everstorm got started. And let's see. The Sons of Honor, before the Everstorm came, actually were important, actually had a real function. They've kind of fallen on hard times by the time it gets to this book, and they're kind of pointless.
It
But
seems like they've had a major decline in leadership, and each successive leader just sort of made things worse and worse.
But the Sons of Honor were part of the scheme to cause this to happen, apparently, and Restaris was one of the main leaders of the Sons of Honor. Restaris, who also happens to be Kalek, the Herald Kalek. So does that mean Kalek was scheming? Was part of a plan to get the Everstorm started and to, bring the fused back, because that is very hard to understand what is going on with him if that's the case.
Well, whenever we're talking about a lot of these people who have been around for so long, whether it's the heralds or a lot of the fused, you have to keep in mind that they're pretty much crazy. They all have some degree of insanity. Even the ones that are holding it together seem to be aware that they are starting to slip. So kind of like Rabanel, like just wanting to, this just has to end. There just has to be some way to end this. It could be that motivation, or it could just be simple insanity.
Yeah, and part of that basically is, this has been, for both the heralds and the fused, this has been going on for 7,000 years now, and they weren't really built for eternity. They basically should be mortals, and what's being dragged on this long is kind of tearing them apart.
Yes, their existence, until the heralds forsake their duty, is a terrible war, and then you get a nice break from that in hell. Then, oh wait, more war. Oh, back to hell. Just over and over.
So let's see. It is also interesting seeing, like, in that backstory, this sibling rivalry between Eshonai and Venli, and why Venli was susceptible to this kind of seduction to the dark side, with the forms of power, because I hadn't thought of that. She's the older brother in the prodigal son. Didn't I stay home? Didn't I, work all these years for you? And this idiot goes out and burns half your money and comes back, and you throw this big party for him. She's the older brother in the prodigal son.
Yeah, I can see it.
And
the great things about those sections, you can get excited about those because, hey, she has motivation. She wants to do things.
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Could you say it again?
Oh yeah, it's easier to be excited about those sections with her because she has motivation. She wants to do things. She wants to actively affect the world around her instead of just running away.
And it's also like, which it's hard to do this well because where all this is going, and like when people do prequel movies a lot, like where all of it's ending up, so it kind of ruins the drama. But in this case, I think Sanderson kind of instead uses that as a dramatic irony. You possess knowledge that the characters don't, and you're like, what? No, this isn't gonna work out like you think it is.
Well, in addition to the dramatic irony, you just have the direct contrast between her then and now. So it just throws both stories into sharper relief.
And so let's see. The third, like I said, three main characters in the Tower story, which is Venli, Kaladin, and Navani. And so Navani, her main role through much of the book is she is a semi-willing research partner with Raboniel, which is a very it's a very odd relationship in this book.
It's strange, but it's well done. Like, it never feels forced. Even whenever she's like, okay, if I work with her, it's going to end badly. But then she feels like, oh wait, I might be able to manipulate her. And I think it's because it lets Navani do the things that she wanted to do anyway, that she's willing to be sort of self-deceptive. Like, well, I didn't have any choice. I needed to keep the deception going. Or she's like, oh, well, I can outsmart her. And then she's proven over and over, like, no, you can't outsmart her. And she keeps trying.
Until she does.
Yeah.
Until she does outsmart her.
Of course, by that point, like, there has been a lot of damage. But at the same time, it's like, well, now there can be an end. But at the same time, if Rabanel just decided to like, basically, if she wasn't an honorable person, then the humans would have no chance, because she could have just, oh, now I know how to end this. I'm just going to kill the only human who knows how this works and just make sure the secret doesn't slip out. So it could have gone very wrong for Navani if it weren't for that. Like, if it weren't for that, Navani would be completely irredeemable.
Well, it's there's another part to it too, with Raboniel, because she's not entirely honorable. I thought you said if I helped you find this, you were gonna leave the tower. Oh, you shouldn't have been you shouldn't have been quite so trusting. And the other part of it, which I think affects Raboniel's decision there, is Raboniel wants the singers to win. But even if that doesn't happen, even kind of bigger than that, she just wants it. She wants the war to be over.
Yes.
Like, she wants her people to win, but one way or another, she wants it to be over. And so I think leaving Navani alive also serves that end for Raboniel.
Oh yeah, I think she even comes right out and says that at the end. But if they can kill Spren and the humans can't do anything about the fuse, then that's still going to end at some point. Especially once Spren realizes their whole motivation for everything that the do in this book is they don't want to get killed again, because bonding with but yeah, all the others are following their lead for the most part, because there's this sort of idea that, hey, if you get the honor Spren on board, then maybe the ink Spren will join in, maybe some of the other Spren will take the lead. But yeah, so like, if she would have just been like, oh yeah, we're gonna keep this information, just kill Navani, like, that would have guaranteed an end to the war at some point. Maybe not as fast as she would like, but at that point, the humans are completely screwed.
And so, in terms of Navani's character, there's 2 points. I kind of saw this, in this book. Navani is stone cold. Like, she's not like, cruel to people around her, people who she cares about, or who she should care about, or anything like that. But like, there's just 2 moments where it's like, wow, that was just cold cruelty there. Not and it's towards an enemy, and it's not undeserved or anything, but it's just kind of stunning. And the first one was, okay, we found void light. We found anti-void light. And Navani knows knows what happens when an anti-light meets the original. She knows it causes a big explosion. And she also knows that, immediately after discovering the two of these, the first thing you think of the first thing you think of doing is combining them. And so, like, she manages to create anti-void light, and then she's like, "Oh, well, I'll just go, check on some of my tools. You have fun with that stuff, Rabodiel," and walks away, fully expecting to come back to, basically a Raboniel in pieces around the room. Um, which that is impressive.
It it's impressive, and it's also kind of halfway towards where she ends up, because even though she wants to do something, she's still trying to figure out a way to have that thing happen while she's not there. She wants it done, and she will do whatever it takes to get it done, except at this point she's not ready to do it with her own bare hands yet.
And then the other moment at the end, near the end, when she stabs Raboniel with the anti-void light dagger, and is actually full on, you are no longer a part of this world, killing her, and she says, "You should have been less trusting," and it's just like, oh wow.
Yeah, and she also gets to do a little bit of damage to Moash.
And he went blind at the end, like permanently. Yep. And I don't know what. I don't think there's any explanation yet why that happened or what it means for the future. He's just blind now, and we don't know why or what it means.
Okay. Okay. So big thing going forward, we have another bondsmith.
And the two of them are married.
Yeah.
I don't.
So, and it's interesting because, okay, so with the Stormfather and Dalinar, the Stormfather seemed to be kind of unsure about whether or not it was wise to bond with a human. But Dalinar has shown himself to be like a respectable person. He's had stuff in his past, but he's actively dealing with it, and people can see a change in him. So if you see him now, he's an honorable man. If you know who he used to be, like, you're just going to be amazed at the change. Okay. So that's sort of understandable. But then you get to the second bondsmith. The sibling actively distrusts Navani. The sibling does not want anything to do with Navani, and it was just sheer necessity that drove them together. So in a lot of ways, they are very much at odds. Like, Navani seems willing to negotiate, but also she wants to keep, experimenting with her Fabrials. But yeah, the sibling is just not having it, but now they're sort of stuck together. That's going to be an interesting relationship going forward.
One other thing that actually reminds me of about these books as a whole, not like a particular storyline or anything, I find kind of interesting. Like, there's this magical system on Roshar, and there's also one interesting thing I see Sanderson doing here. There's actually like a technological progression, and it's an entirely different kind of technology than ours. And I think that's kind of cool, because most places, most stories where they have magic going on. Either it's relatively like the Lord of the Rings, and um, technology is basically static. It's not really, changing in major ways over very long periods of time. Or there's also like, kind of Shadowrun kind of things where there's, our technology and magic, or like a developments similar to our technology, developments of our kind of technology and magic, but they're not really like, the two don't interact. The two don't really meet in any kind of in any way. Whereas this one, there's a different, there's technology. There's a things and things built by engineering and science, um, and it's an entirely different kind of science than our own. And also there's progressing. They're figuring out new applications. They're figuring out new ways to do these things, and it's kind of an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, the only other thing that I can really think of, so like you do see this a little bit in the second Mistborn series, but it also seems to be like, well, this is technology progressing, and they also have magic sort of parallel. But where they sort of combine in this way, I'm thinking like Avatar: Legend of Korra, where you sort of had the shakeup of stuff from Aang's time, where now like you have lightning benders and metal benders. So all of a sudden, like you can have like electricity as like you have a source of electricity. You could just employ lightning benders. So now you can have like power plants and stuff like that. And that sort of spurs technology all of a sudden. And that just made me think, well, all this technology that we're seeing here, a lot of that is driven by Urithiru. Part of it because Urithiru is like giving them access to all these advanced ideas that they hadn't thought of before. But also now you can have people from all over Rashar getting together and collaborating with relative ease.
Yeah, and so, but yeah, like I said, just seeing that kind of magitech progress is an interesting feature of this series. Um, One thing I really did not want to I didn't want to pass up, um, the conflict between Kaladin and Lirin in this book is really well done, and I'm really impressed there, because like you have these two people who care about each other for one thing, um, and there's this one issue where they're just completely at odds,
And
and
and they both have reasonable positions.
right, and it's like it's a moral conflict, but neither one of them is clearly wrong. um and it's that's interesting, and I think it seems to me that's a hard thing to pull off, um because like obviously the easier thing to do is you have a moral conflict, and it ends up one person is right and one person is wrong, or at least one person is more right than the other. And no, they both have, Lirin, you know, we should save life. All this fighting isn't helping. You're not, what are you actually going to accomplish? Why are you doing this? And then, Kaladin, you know, I have to protect these people. These people are my people. And, if to protect them, I have to hurt others, well, that's just the way it's going to be. And like there's some value in both of them, and it's kind of it's an interesting thing, and the way they end up resolving that, um, you know, and Kaladin saves Lyran at the end, and it's not. Give me a second. It's not. Like, there's a recognition on both sides that, like both of them are like, you know what, you have a point. You are right, and I can't agree with you, but I respect this. And it's like there's a recognition then on both sides, and that's just a pretty. It seems to me a pretty difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah. Well, so if you look at things from Lyran's perspective, he has seen all these like wars and stuff, like people fighting each other, and then at the end of the day, nothing's really changed. So from his point of view, like all this fighting, like it's just sort of useless and it just causes pain and there's no real benefit. So it makes sense that his idea is just, just don't fight, just go along with whoever's in power. Don't start anything, like just kind of keep your head down and just do whatever you can do to help people. Whereas Kaladin, like, he sees his brother put in trouble, and he sees his dad not really be able to do anything to stop it. So early on, Kaladin gets into his head, I have, like, in order to protect people, you can't just keep your head down. You have to actually be involved. And both, they're dedicated to their own view, and they see, like, in their minds, that's the only way it can be, but they also both suffer for it, because Lyran loses a son and sees all of the trouble that his other son has to go through. So, like, that's a lot of pain he's dealing with, but also he can kind of blame that on, oh, well, Kaladin's making wrong choices. That's why he's suffering. And Kaladin has to live with all the suffering that he's going through. Like, he is a wreck. He has seen things that no human should have to deal with, just war and suffering, slavery. But from his point of view, like, you just have to go through. So both people are completely convinced they're right, but they are also suffering immensely from doing what they believe is right, but they're still convinced that it's right, because the other person, like, yeah, they just don't see the world for how it is. And it's just, like, again, like, even though it's taking place in this ridiculous fantasy story, like, those are very human dilemmas that are done very well. I will say, though, even though at this point, like, he really has no way of knowing it, Lyran is kind of like, if you have to point to one person who is wrong, it would be Lyran, because most of his experience is like war between different lords or war between different nations. We're getting to the point where it's going to be war, like, on universal scales, where there is a lot more at stake than which minor lord owns this little bit of land.
Yeah, it's what would it be? It's his what his previous experience that he's basing his his kind of his paradigm on doesn't scale up quite as well. I guess would be one way of putting it. Oh gosh, so crud. I think we've covered a lot of the stuff from the Tower storyline pretty well.
Well, and between Vinley and Eshonai's story and the occupation of the Tower, I feel like that was the core of the book.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the timer here, and we are a little over an hour
Well, I don't think the rest will take quite as long.
Okay, okay. So let's see. The second storyline, like I said, is the Emuli campaign, which is Dalinar leading a military campaign, accompanied by the Mink, and Dalinar is also trying to figure out what his future role in this is going to be, because he's come to the conclusion that what is it? Being a bondsmith is going to be more important than being a general, but he still doesn't really know what that is supposed to mean. There's no one to teach him very well.
Yeah, that's sort of a running theme for Dalinar is he pretty much always has some degree of power, but it's like, what do I do with this? It's like, am I supposed to be High King? No, I'm going to be King of Urithiru. Oh well, wait, I'm a bondsmith now. It's like each time, like he knows that he's in an important position, and decisions he make will affect, like the nation, the world, the universe, but he has no idea what he's actually supposed to do with it. He is like aware that he has to like constantly be striving to be a better person, and he has become much more self-reflective. But yeah, that seems to be his theme. Like, what do I do with the power that's given me? Just big time. What is his role? Like, where does he fit into things? And I do like that he's willing to give up the direct control over a lot of things that previously he would have wanted to micromanage. There's a lot of character growth going with Dalinar.
Well, another part of that also is though, like previously when he was trying to run so many more things himself, the person who was, the person who was supposed to be in charge was Elhokar, who had no idea what he was doing, or at least not most of the time. In book 3, he finally started to get himself together, and immediately got killed. So that kind of sucks. But and so part of why he's able to kind of hand things off is because he's getting kind of competent subordinates or competent people in these other roles that he can say, you know what, I trust you with this. I think you know what you're doing, so this is gonna be yours, and I'll go figure out my own thing. And so, Yasna is, queen now, and she's in charge of the, kind of, political decisions and management. And the Mink.
Well, and also getting involved in the whole warfare aspect.
Um, I don't know. She was fighting. I don't know if she intends to continue in that role, or if that was. I got the impression part of the point of that was that she felt like she needed to know what it was like, um, in order to, if she's going to be commanding these people, it's not right to do that if she's never been in the middle of it at all.
Right. So she's preparing herself to take a more active role in the whole military aspect, which makes sense because of how important the military is in that culture. And as a woman, she would have no practical experience. The women do go with their men to war and work as scribes, but their idea of it is very much academic. So now she's getting the practical experience where, like, she will both understand it from a better perspective, but also if she orders somebody to do something, this isn't just some, like scholar who has no idea how it really is telling them what to do. No, she's been in she's been in the fight with them.
Yeah, and so yeah, so Yasna has the is taking the charge of the political things, and it looks like the Mink is going to be doing the military planning. Um, did they say Dalinar was going to be the champion, or is he picking someone else?
He seems pretty set on it being him.
Well,
And honestly, it makes sense because Odium realized he would make a great champion.
yeah, there's that. It just it didn't. Well, I know he's like Kaladin. It's not going to be you, and I know he said that, but I wasn't sure if he said it was going to be him. Um, so
I'm pretty sure it is.
So of the Amuli campaign, I think the most interesting part is Taravangian, especially considering how that concludes. Um, because Taravangian manages to kill Odium, or manages to kill the previous version of Odium and take up his powers. Which this is the second time we've seen that in one of Brandon Sanderson's books.
Well, we've seen it. Well, it's the second universe we've seen it in, but it happened a couple of times in Mistborn.
Yeah, well, no, that's what I was saying. Okay, yeah, there's right. If you count the secret history, it happened
but
once
but
more.
yeah, it's big. So as I was reading the book, whenever it would jump to something with Odium, I felt like he was kind of underdeveloped, and I was thinking, oh well, maybe they'll fill in like more about him later on, especially because in some of the like chapter headings where like Harmony like sort of talks about Wit being a little bit too preoccupied with the vessel, and I'm like, well, we really don't know that much about the vessel. But yeah, then at the end it's like, right. So at the end it's like, oh well, that's why he's not developed very well, because the real enemy has been there all along. Like we've been seeing him since book one, and that is terrifying. Like it's yeah, it's this is that was big.
Well, and the other thing with Taravangian's ascent is like it for just a little while you're not sure what he's going to do with this. Because he seems to be kind of struggling against the natural inclinations of that aspect of and then it kind of concludes with him deciding he's going to save everyone. He kind of says to himself something like that. Um, but we've seen what his version of saving people is like before.
Yeah.
We've seen what Taravangian does when he's trying to save the world.
So it's sort of the balance with Taravangian, where whenever we've seen him, he has either been highly intelligent or he's been very empathetic. So he's been good or smart, but never both. And it looks like, yeah, like the smart side just won. So now it's just the smart Taravangian with the power of Odium.
Well, okay, now there is one other thing there though, because there are three characters in these stories that we now know. I don't know if there are more. I don't know. I don't think there's any indications that there's another one. But there's three characters that cultivation personally interfered with. Um, there was Dalinar, and he took away his memories of Evie. Was it
Correct.
Evie? Okay. Um, And cultivation did that so that when Dalinar finally was, confronted by Odium, um, Dalinar would have had some time to reform himself into something better. And then, he basically got it back just in time that, when Odium says, "Here, let me take this," he's actually experiencing the pain. And he's, really, and it's a real choice. But she gave him an opportunity to, reform himself into something stronger. There's, Taravangian, cultivation touched, and, you know, he could be, he had, this hyper intelligence, and to, save his people, or he had, compassion on people, but not both at the same time. Um, and it seems like when uh Terra Odium talks to cultivation at the end, it seems like she would this was her part of this was something she was working towards. Like this was her chess pieces coming into place.
So I feel like what she was working towards was the realization he has at the end that it was the stupid Taravangian that was the important one, because he kind of realizes that all his intelligence did, like, he wanted to save everyone, but that kept getting narrower and narrower. But like whenever he actually needed to reach through to somebody, like it was too late. He relied too heavily on the intellect and not the empathy. So I think that's the lesson she was going for, but he learned it a little too late. And as soon as he got the power, it's like he forgot it, because he goes right back to the scheming.
Well, and yeah, it actually and his another thing with him reminds me of there's a C.S. Lewis quote which I see a lot lately. It's like the worst tyrants to live under are not the worst tyrants to live under would not be like, cruel cruel, selfish conquerors. The worst tyrants to live under would be omnipotent moral busybodies, because they will do all these horrible things to you, um, and they will never stop because they're doing it for your own good. And it kind of looks like we're about to see that, on steroids,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and then to complete your list, the third person she interacted with directly affected was Lift.
And we still don't know what that is supposed to add up to.
Yeah,
So that's
she had a good supporting role in the tower story, but I feel like there's a lot of questions about her. There was stuff that was hinted at, like we kind of know what she asked, but we don't know. Yeah, we don't know what actually happened, because apparently she understood she would stop growing, but that's not happening. So what
but
exactly was that aspect of the gift?
well, and the other thing is, like, the other two, cultivation was making this part of some kind of much larger plan. And so it seems likely that the same is true for Lyft, but we don't know what that is yet. And so that should be interesting. It should be very interesting to see what comes of that.
Hmm.
What was there was something else here. Give me a second. Cultivation, lift. Oh crud. I had it and it's gone. Um the other thing from the Amoli campaign, when they go to when they finally go to meet the other herald who has declared himself a god king, and they manage to drive him off with Nightblood being a very important part of that. Um, and then they find dead Spren in a way no one's seen dead Spren quite like this before. In fact, they didn't know it was possible because they found the bodies of Spren brought over to the physical realm and then killed. Not
So,
in the manner of Dead Eyes where they're walking walking around but their mind is gone, but physically murdered.
yeah, I feel like we kind of should have seen this being possible coming, because like humans are able to travel into the cognitive realm and remain their human forms, but also humans have a sort of Spren-like form in the cognitive realm whenever they're in the physical realm, because like you can see the lights and stuff that represent the people.
Right. Yes.
So the humans and the Spren are kind of like reflections of each other, where it's like you have the humans, the human form, and the Spren form in the human world, and then vice versa. So if the humans can go in their normal form into the cognitive realm, it kind of makes sense that there should be a way for the Spren to go the other direction.
One interesting thing about that, the nation he's leading is the Tukari. Is that right?
I believe so.
Okay. Am I right that the people, the humans that Adolin ends up fighting to save Notum are Tukari? Was I do I have that right?
I am not sure.
Okay. I don't, and you probably wouldn't be able to look that up with anything like a reasonable time right now.
No, and I don't think it specifies. I think it just mentions the way that they're dressed and that they look human, but they don't look Alethi.
Okay. I think it might have said that they either were or looked or spoke to Kari, which then what I kind of wonder about, because they were going to kill Notum, right? Although as Adolin understood it, they were going to kill him by tormenting him to the point where he turned into a Dead Eyes. But I wonder if what they were really trying to do was get him, capture him, and take him back over to the other side and kill him that way.
It's very possible, because most of the honor Spren were staying inside of Lasting Integrity, and he was one of the only ones that was directly forbidden from it and was also wandering around by himself. So he would be the perfect target for that.
That seems like another one of those very frequent moments in Brandon Sanderson books. Look back and, oh, well, I understand that better now.
Okay. Which means we have sort of jumped into the Lasting Integrity. Yes.
Mission to Lasting Integrity. And this is for one thing, this is the second extended trip into Shadesmar, which that's kind of interesting. Go ahead. What was the first thing you wanted to say about this one?
Yeah. So, like you said, it's the second trip, so they do run into the guy that they had met before. But yeah, like the whole Lasting Integrity thing, it was just fascinating that so this is our second trip in Shadesmar. We're used to it. Like, we kind of have a general idea how the cognitive realm works from, previous books and other books in the Cosmere. But then you get to stuff like inside Lasting Integrity, where it's like the walls are the floor now, and just the strange geometries. where they're able to make it even weirder. And now we actually get to learn a little bit about like their version of weather. So it was less of like, hey, this is just a completely bizarre thing, to just some interesting like world building where you get into more specifics. Like instead of this is just completely, weird and there's no explanation, it's like, no, this place has its own rules. Now we'll learn more about those rules. So even aside from the like plot points in it, that world building was just very interesting.
And yeah, for me, one of the first things that jumped out at me in this book, the narrative style he has with Shallan and shifting between like the three personalities, that takes a while to get used to.
Yeah. I remember you telling me you were kind of worried about that early on.
Yeah, because it's like, is he gonna be doing this the whole book? And he does, and I guess I just got used to it after a while, but it is a little jarring.
I didn't mind it. I felt like the way he wrote it, it sort of they sort of flowed into each other kind of well, where it's like, yeah, there are some abrupt changes, but those are like meant to be changes. Like the people around her are also reacting to it, and she also recognizes how strange it is, so she like voluntarily changes her hair color just so everybody knows who she is. So little things like that, like there were concessions to the whole like strangeness of it that I think made it work pretty well.
I think one other kind of interesting thing with that is the way the kind of resolution of a couple of parts of that story. Um, she spends Shallan spends a lot of this story trying to figure out who among her friends is untrustworthy, who among her allies is a spy for Marays. Um, and she has these two other parts of her. There's Radiant, who is if you want to do D&D alignments, Radiant is lawful good. And there's Vale, who is chaotic neutral, I guess. Um, and then we get to the end of the story, and pretty close together, we find out that Radiant, going rogue from the three of them, was the one who killed Ela, and Vale is the one who talks Shallan down from killing Kalek, which is kind of funny because it seems like you would have been completely unsurprised if Vale had killed Ela and Radiant talked Shallan out of going through with it. But it was he did it entirely the other way around.
Yeah, that reminds me of since you brought up D&D, Rich Burlew, the guy who writes Order of the Stick, the D&D comic. He wrote some articles years ago about role playing and just sort of like the theory behind it and how to do it well. And one of the things he talks about is like, you can't just create an idea for a character and just have that always be the case. Like you have to have the character react realistically to the situation they're in and what their goals are. So he uses as an example like say you have a paladin who is very cautious and there's a hallway full of traps. He's going to go very carefully, check for traps each spot, and just take his time, not rush. But if there is a child that is in danger, and he knows he has to rescue this child as fast as possible, he will just rush through that hallway, trigger every trap, and just trust that his allies are going to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to get to the kid. Like, he's going to risk himself. Doesn't matter how cautious he is. If the goal requires him to behave differently, he's going to do it. And in both of, for Shallan, both of her alter egos are meant to protect her. So they are going to do whatever it takes to protect her, even if that means like they cease to exist and are like reabsorbed into her greater consciousness, or do something that they find abhorrent. They are going to do what it takes.
And so the other thing with Shallan's character in this one is, we find out what the next thing was that she was unable to confront previously. Which was, Shallan, killed the first cryptic that had bonded with her.
Yeah. That's another bombshell.
And it's it is a little it does feel a little odd, because like, okay, the things she had been able to deal with earlier was that she had killed her mother and she had killed her father. Like, why is this worse to her? That seems a little odd. At the same time, and this is actually something I saw in, I think it was by Joe Haldeman, a story by Joe Haldeman. Like, okay, if you kill a human, you're making something happen that was going to happen at some point anyway. If you kill an immortal, that's an entirely different kind of crime.
Well, and also, so we already talked earlier about how, like, in order to have one of these bonds to begin with, you have to be like broken in some way. Like, it's a spiritual bond that sort of requires letting this other entity basically become a part of you. So whenever she betrayed it, like, yeah, she's basically betraying like a part of herself. Like, she is, like, it's almost comparable to just like destroying a part of your own soul, I feel like. It's like, yeah, you have this crack in your soul that's been filled, but now you're just ripping that filling out and it's crack again.
Yeah. And of course, as usual, you have this big plot reveal in a Brandon Sanderson book, and you also have a in retrospect, this big flashing red light earlier, because as they're traveling through Shadesmar, Adolin finds a Deadeye cryptic who is not only a Deadeye, but was killed sometime within the past 10 or 20 years, which was not not the Recreants, not like this ancient history. Very recently, someone there was a light weaver who broke their oath and destroyed their spren. Well, who could that have been? So that's another one of his I guess a Chekhov's gun kind of thing. So but
okay, so I think the next big thing is Maya's reveal.
Well, okay, there's a couple things with that, because for one thing, there was some hint in Oathbringer, um, Maya Lauren was not quite as dead as everyone had thought, right? And that's definitely increasing. Like she is doing things that Deadeyes are not supposed to be able to do. And she is taking deliberate action, and she actually speaks. She speaks intelligible words. Um, and so something I'd been wondering about from the last book. It seems more possible now that you know through her connection to Adolin, she might it. I wonder if she's going to be able to revive, and if and for one thing, if that happens, what that might mean for the other shard blades slash for the other dead shard blades slash dead eyes.
Yeah, there's too many options there for me to really feel one way or the other about it, because they might very well be some way for them to be completely healed. They might sort of still be a version of Dead Eyes, just a little more cognizant of what's going on around them. Like, could be pretty much anything there. The thing that really got me about it is I saw the setup for her being presented at the trial and her speaking and defending Adolin. Okay, I was expecting her to sort of testify to Adolin being a good person and that being the shock. But then going back and redefining like everything that everyone knew for like the entire series and just throwing everything into a completely new context, I did not see that coming. And as big as this series is already, it makes me want to go back to book one and read it all over, knowing what I know now.
Yeah, by the time by the time he finishes book 10, I'm going to have to, however old I am at that point, I'm going to have to just basically pull up the whole series and go through the whole thing again, which is basically probably going to be like a year in itself, and that's all I read. Um, but let's see. Yeah, it's one thing about this. Okay, so the Recreants was the choice. The Recreants, the ancient Radiants, breaking their oaths, ending the Orders of the Knights Radiant, and killing the Spren that had joined with them. Okay, um, that was the choice. That was not just the humans abandoning their duty and betraying the Spren. It was the humans and the Spren agreeing that this is something that has to be done. Um, for some reason that we don't really know yet. So there's that. And I assume we're going to find out something about that. And but where was I going with that? Oh, one interesting thing about that is to me is this actually matches much better what we see in Dalinar's visions in book one. That story seems much easier to match with the where he sees the Knights Radiant, all marching up together onto this plane, and letting their armor fall off and dropping their shard blades and just walking away. Um, it's hard. It's kind of hard to match that event as Dalinar saw it with they betrayed their oaths. They betrayed this ultimate trust like that, um, and but they did that all together as a group. Like that seems very strange. But now with this new information, you're like, well, yeah, that's probably how that makes perfect sense that that's how they would do that.
Yep. And it makes me wonder what else changes knowing this information.
Well, and I just remembered one other thing. Let's see. So we found out. Okay, there's kind of two things that happened between the most recent desolation, the most recent, stage of the war between the humans and the fused, and the coming of the Everstorm. One was all the other heralds walked away and left the one who had never broken on Braze. And for literally thousands of years, he didn't break. So that was one thing. And that seemed like a sufficient explanation. Well, but okay, that was part of the explanation for why this wasn't coming back. But there was a second thing, which we now know a little bit about, that one of the unmade, oh crud, I don't have this written down. Ba Mishram. Let me see if I can find this. I have
That sounds right.
Let's see. Ba Auto Mishram. There we go. One of the unmade had decided, like apart from Odium, to grant power to the singers as a whole. And they were able to capture and imprison her, and in doing so, that was what basically broke the Parshmen, broke the singers, and turned them into the Parshmen. And so, and then Kalek is warning, like, what you did in imprisoning her, is worse than you have any idea of, and you need to undo that. And so what that means and what undoing, like what reversing that would mean, that is going to be interesting to see as well.
Okay. Well, the only thing that I can think of to talk about is pretty much the very last scene with Wit or Hoyd, whatever you want to call him, talking to Odium.
Also, we finally found out his proper name. Let me see if I can find that, because Hoyd, because known.
See, did we?
Yeah, because someone, like one of, okay, for one thing we know about him now is that he's apparently been around from the breaking of Adonalsium.
Correct. Apparently he was present and he didn't want a shard.
Right, and he could have, taken up a piece of that power himself, but did not. But he basically somehow did take up enough power that he is immortal.
Yeah, he seems to travel between the different worlds and incorporates bits of their power into himself.
But and so yeah, there was another name for him. Void, Rumor, Dust, Wit. No. Saphandrius, there it is. I think either one of the versions of Odium refers to him by that name, Saphandrius. And considering that Odium is it again, it appears that Braze was the original Odium, was the one who took that first, and they knew each other from, however far back that was.
Right.
And so Braze would know his real name, would know who he really is. And so I suspect that is his real name. But okay, but anyway, the final scene with those two.
Yeah, so it looks like Wit is going to be a much more active player in things going forward. And up until now, it's like, oh, well, he's the one that knows everything that's going on. But now that like some of his memories have been like deliberately removed, he goes from, oh, well, he's the one that knows what's going on and he's acting with complete information, to, oh, any help he tries to give now is going to be tainted. It's like he could do a lot more harm than good by getting involved.
It's also a question of how much was taken out. I mean, it's clear that part of what was done was that Odium removed his memories of their conversation. The question is, was that all, or was there significantly more? And if there was more, what was the rest of it that Odium took?
So part of so this is dealing with the magic from Warbreaker, where you have the different breaths, and he had apparently stored his memories in some of these breaths, and he had accumulated enough of them where he had perfect pitch. So I feel like for him to have lost that after Odium removed some of them, like, I don't feel like he had like just enough breath to have like perfect pitch, and then Odium removed the one and it was gone. I feel like Odium would have gone through, and because this is Taravangian we're talking about, like gone through and removed everything that could be a danger to him, because he has the benefit of knowing everything that Odium has experienced in relation to Wit. So I feel like he would have gone through and would have molded it to whatever his purposes were.
Yeah. Oh, there is I just remembered there is one other, kind of large scale thing with these books that I wanted to touch on quickly, that I find interesting. Especially because we've seen it before in other Brandon Sanderson books. And that is okay, so Odium's goal apparently is to use the humans and possibly the singers as well as an army to war on the other and conquer the other worlds.
Yes.
And then it's I find that kind of interesting, because if you look at Vorinism, their idea of what the purpose of this life is and what the afterlife is this is a training ground, and then they're going to go to the Tranquiline Halls, and if they've proved themselves, they're going to be a part of a war to recapture heaven.
Yeah. Well, I think if it's not stated more or less outright, I think it's heavily implied that Odium was the one that like brought the humans to Roshar. So it because like the Alethi culture seems like it came like in large part like straight from Odium.
Well, part of it was, and we don't know how long this was, but part of it was shaped by the unmade, the thrill, the unmade of, bloodlust that was, that basically made Alethkar its home for a long time.
Well, I feel like that sort of wrote on it, but Alethi culture, it's a very like regimented, like it's a very like orderly, like militaristic thing, whereas the thrill was just straight up bloodlust.
Yeah, and so, but it's kind of interesting seeing like these elements of their religion and kind of their prophecies have been shaped by basically their greatest enemy to his advantage, which is also exactly what happened in Mistborn. Because they're prophecies of the hero of ages and what this person is going to do, and they were real, but most forms of record keeping Ruin could subtly alter, and he did to make it into to make them to guide them to the actions he wanted them to take. And this is the same thing on kind of a much larger scale, which I kind of found that interesting.
So I have noticed that Brandon Sanderson does seem to reuse ideas a lot within the Cosmere stories. And I don't think it's laziness by any means. I feel like he's doing it because this is all taking place within the same universe, and there's going to be themes that reoccur and sort of play off each other. Like going back and reading I'm sorry, I'm blanking. It's kind of late at night. But yeah, so going back and reading Elantris, like it starts off like, oh, so you have this young, naive noblewoman who is, in an arranged marriage, and she doesn't know what to expect, and she shows up and hey, everything's different from what she was expecting. And then you also have in like Warbreaker, which is, a young, naive noblewoman who's being given an arranged marriage, and she shows up and hey, this is not what she was expecting. And then you have Shallan, who was sort of, a young, naive noblewoman who at one point is
who is also a double parasite, but let's pass that by.
In an arranged marriage to Adolin, and it does not go how she was expecting. But in each one of those setups, like all the details are different, and they all turn out very differently. So it like, when I first noticed that, I'm like, he's reusing the same setup, but in every time it leads to wildly different results. And like, I just think like, well, it makes sense because this is all happening within the same universe where there's a lot of the same forces at play. So yeah, like, so now whenever I'm like, see little things like that, well, like, wait, we saw that in this other series. I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. I see what he's doing there.
Okay. We could go on quite a bit longer. I think it's probably time to wrap it up for tonight. So any last big points you wanted to hit?
At this point, I'm just really excited to see what comes next. Like, at this point, Brandon Sanderson can do just about anything with this series, and I'm on board.
Okay. Well, hopefully in another couple of years we will be getting together to talk about Book 5 and see how that develops. And in the meantime, good night and Godspeed.
Have a good one.